Today, we're ranking the most ruthless villains in Dexter's history. The ones who didn't just kill, but completely shattered lives. But before we dive in, I have to say, you guys are basically running this channel at this point. Seriously, almost every video idea comes straight from the comments. I might as well just hand over the password and let you take over. But until that happens, let's get into it. If we're talking about cold-blooded ruthlessness, Brian Moser, aka the Ice Truck Killer, deserves the top spot in our Hell's Finest category. Unlike most of Dexter's enemies who killed for revenge, power, or twisted morality, Brian had only one goal: to reshape Dexter into the monster he believed he was meant to be. From the moment Brian stepped back into Dexter's life, everything was part of a larger game. The staged bodies? Not random victims, they were carefully placed clues. The amputations? A direct reference to their childhood trauma, forcing Dexter to confront the memories he had buried. Brian wasn't just a killer. He was a manipulator of the highest order. And Brian's cruelty didn't stop there. He targeted Deborah, luring her into a fake relationship just so he could kidnap her and force Dexter into an impossible choice. His ultimate test? Would Dexter kill his own sister? And here's the terrifying part. Brian almost won. He is the only villain who ever made Dexter genuinely consider abandoning the code of Harry. Every kill Dexter committed after this, Brian planted that seed, because at the end of the day, Brian wasn't just Dexter's brother. He was the only person who ever truly understood him. And that's why he takes the #1 spot as the most ruthless villain of them all. If there's one villain in Dexter's entire history who left the deepest, most permanent scar, it's Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer. That's why he earns a spot in Hell's Finest, alongside Brian Moser, as one of the few villains who completely shattered Dexter's world. Unlike other serial killers, Trinity wasn't just a murderer. He was a destruction machine. He didn't just take lives, he ruined them from the inside out. His ritualistic cycle of murder wasn't terrifying just because of the brutality. It was terrifying because of the precision. His victims were carefully chosen, his patterns methodical, and his kills were spaced out over decades, making him nearly impossible to catch. First, he would bludgeon a man to death with a hammer. Then, he would force a woman to jump to her death from a high building. He would kill a other victim in a bathtub, all as part of his twisted recreation of his own childhood trauma. This wasn't just serial killing. It was a deeply ingrained compulsion, a ritual he had been trapped in for decades. But what made Trinity truly ruthless wasn't just the killings. It was his ability to live two lives flawlessly: a devoted father and husband on the outside, a sadistic killer and master manipulator underneath. He gaslit his family into submission, creating a home built on fear, where his wife and children were trapped in his illusion, too afraid to question him. And then, he did the unthinkable: he killed Rita. That final scene with Dexter finding Rita dead in the bathtub and baby Harrison crying in a pool of her blood wasn't just shocking, it was soul-crushing. This wasn't just another murder, this was personal. Trinity didn't just take a life, he took Dexter's only chance at a real family. That's why Trinity isn't just one of Dexter's greatest villains. He's the man who broke him. Because after this, Dexter was never the same. If we're talking about pure, unfiltered evil, Oliver Saxon belongs in bloodthirsty maniacs, a category reserved for killers who thrived on brutality without reason, rules, or restraint. Unlike other murderers in Dexter's world who operated under a code, a twisted philosophy, or even personal trauma, Saxon killed because he simply didn't care about human life. There was no justification, no greater purpose, just cold, mechanical violence. Saxon wasn't just a killer, he was a butcher. His victims weren't stabbed or strangled in a moment of rage, they were dissected. He carved into their brains while they were still alive, performing his own grotesque version of neurosurgery as if he were casually tinkering with a machine instead of torturing a human being. This level of detachment wasn't just terrifying, it was inhuman. And unlike most of Dexter's foes, Saxon had no emotion, no fear, no remorse. Even Trinity, for all his brutality, was trapped in a cycle of trauma. But Saxon? He killed simply because he wanted to. His most chilling murder? Dr. Vogel, his own mother. And it wasn't just to get rid of her, it was a calculated, deliberate statement. She had tried to mold him into something she could control, just like she had shaped Dexter. But Saxon proved that he wasn't like Dexter. He was something much worse. When Dexter finally had Saxon, he didn't follow the code. No plastic sheets, no ritual, no methodical speech, just a pen. One quick stab to the neck. Saxon was the only villain Dexter ever killed purely out of revenge. No justification, No code, just raw personal execution. And that should tell you everything you need to know about how dangerous this man really was. If we're talking about pure sadistic brutality, the Skinner is one of the most horrifying villains Dexter ever faced. Unlike the methodical serial killers like Trinity or Saxon, the Skinner wasn't interested in psychological games. He was a predator, and his weapon of choice was pain. That's why he fits perfectly in bloodthirsty maniacs, a category reserved for killers who thrived on torture, suffering, and raw violence. His real name was George King, but the people of Miami only knew him by what he did to his victims, skinning them alive. And this wasn't just about killing. It was about breaking people before they died. Every victim was slowly and carefully flayed, their skin peeled back layer by layer, ensuring maximum suffering before death finally came as mercy. And what made him even more terrifying? He was patient. Unlike other Dexter villains who struck quickly, the Skinner hunted his prey like an animal, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He wasn't reckless. He was precise. His victims weren't just random. They were carefully selected, interrogated, and tortured until they gave up the information he wanted. And then came his most terrifying move. He kidnapped Dexter. For the first time in the series, Dexter was the one strapped to a table, not as the hunter, but as the prey. Bound, helpless, seconds away from being skinned alive. And had Dexter not managed to escape, he would have been just another one of the Skinner's mutilated victims. But even after Dexter overpowered him, the Skinner didn't stop coming. That's what makes him truly ruthless. He didn't give up. He didn't back down. Even in the face of death, he fought to kill. And that sheer, unrelenting brutality earns him a high spot on this list. If we're talking about the ultimate human predator, Kurt Caldwell belongs in deadly strategists, a category reserved for killers who weren't just violent, but methodical, turning murder into something more than just an act. While most serial killers in Dexter acted on impulse, trauma, or ritual, Kurt's killings were something entirely different. A sport, a game, a twisted form of control. Kurt wasn't a man driven by rage or psychological trauma. He killed because he wanted to, because he enjoyed the process. Unlike the more chaotic killers on this list, Kurt played the long game. He would gain his victims' trust, offering them food, shelter, and warmth, only to turn around and hunt them down like animals. And this wasn't some short-lived spree. He did this for decades. His entire life was structured around luring vulnerable girls into his grasp, making them believe they had finally found safety before killing them. And then there was his trophy room. Unlike Dexter, who kept blood slides as a reminder of his kills, Kurt went one step further. He didn't just collect mementos, he preserved his victims' entire bodies. Beneath his diner, hidden behind steel doors, was an underground mausoleum of frozen corpses, each girl meticulously embalmed and displayed like a twisted museum exhibit. This wasn't just about murder. It was about immortalizing his dominance. But perhaps his most terrifying act was his attempt to manipulate Harrison. Kurt almost succeeded in doing what no other villain had, stealing Dexter's son away from him. He saw in Harrison a kindred spirit, someone he could shape into his successor. And had Dexter not intervened, Harrison could have been the next hunter, trained under a man whose entire existence revolved around the act of killing for sport. That's what makes Kurt Caldwell so uniquely terrifying. He wasn't just a killer. He was a system, a machine, a predator in plain sight. And had Dexter not stopped him, he would have kept going forever. If we're talking about evil without limits, Jordan Chase belongs in deadly strategists, a category reserved for killers who didn't just kill, but built entire systems around their depravity. Unlike most of Dexter's enemies, who thrived on the act of murder itself, Jordan never even had to get his hands dirty. He was the mastermind, the orchestrator, the leader of a cult so vile that even Dexter had to acknowledge its scale. Jordan Chase wasn't just a lone killer operating in the shadows. He was the face of a secret society of predators, wealthy, powerful men who, under his influence, hunted, tortured, and murdered women for sport. And the most terrifying part? They worshipped him for it. Most of Dexter's enemies followed a personal, twisted code. Even the worst killers had some internal logic driving their actions. But Jordan? He built an entire system of depravity. He brainwashed his followers, convincing them that their urges weren't just natural, but that they were entitled to act on them. And unlike other killers, he was untouchable. He hid behind money, power, and influence, operating in plain sight as a respected motivational speaker, a man who claimed to help people unlock their true potential. But behind closed doors, he enabled monsters. That's what makes Jordan Chase so terrifying. His evil wasn't impulsive or messy. It was structured, organized, industrialized. Jordan Chase proved that you don't need a knife to be a killer. Sometimes, all you need is influence. And that's what makes him one of the most sinister villains on this list. If we're talking about betrayal, corruption, and the dangers of unchecked power, Miguel Prado belongs in unstable threats, a category reserved for killers who had potential but let their own arrogance, ego, or emotions lead to their downfall. Unlike the other villains on this list, Miguel didn't start out as Dexter's enemy. He started as his friend, his closest ally, and for a brief moment, his equal. At first, it seemed too good to be true. A high-ranking assistant district attorney, a man with a thirst for justice who not only understood Dexter's need to kill but actively encouraged it. For the first time, Dexter felt like he had a true partner, someone he could trust, someone who wouldn't just accept his darkness but embrace it. But here's the problem. Miguel didn't follow the code. Dexter's entire system is built on control, precision, and a strict set of rules. But Miguel, he saw murder as power, as an opportunity. And once he got a taste, he didn't stop. He didn't care about justice, only about his own twisted sense of dominance. And when Dexter realized the truth, Miguel turned on him instantly. That's what makes him so dangerous. He had power, influence, and the law on his side. He wasn't just some serial killer lurking in the shadows. He was a public figure with an army behind him. If he wanted Dexter gone, he had the means to make it happen. And so, Dexter had to do something he never expected. Kill the one person he thought he could trust. Miguel Prado might not have been the most sadistic killer on this list, but he represents something even worse: the corruption of power, the illusion of friendship, and the terrifying reality that even your closest allies can become your deadliest enemies. And there you have it, the most ruthless villains in Dexter's history, ranked from pure nightmare fuel to dangerous backstabbers. But let's be honest, this debate is far from over. Did we get it right? Maybe you believe Miguel Prado was more dangerous than we gave him credit for. Drop your ranking in the comments, and defend your choice like Dexter defends his dark passenger. And speaking of dark urges, if you've made it this far, it's clear you have a taste for the darkness. So why not embrace it? Hit that subscribe button, and you'll officially join the ranks of Dexter's most trusted dark passengers. Because let's face it, every true Dexter fan has a little darkness inside them. And now, one last request before you disappear into the shadows. What's the next Dark Dexter topic we should break down? A deep dive into the best kills, the worst mistakes, the ultimate what-if scenarios? Drop your ideas in the comments, and who knows, your suggestion might just be our next target. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, even the best hunters can become the hunted.